So let's start talking about weight. Now, the idea is that before we begin actually talking about which one is heavier or lighter, get your child to experience weight. So this is a very important idea that they should experience weight in an intuitive manner. So I want you to really do is encourage your child to sort of play with objects with you and sort of get this idea across what is heavier and what is lighter. And there should be no scales or anything like that. Uh, we have to clarify what is heavier, what is lighter, what is heaviest, what is lightest, and that should just come through a discussion. It should not come through any mathematical or any very organized experimentation, but more like playing with objects, talking about which one is easier to lift, which one is harder to lift, which one is easier to move, harder to move, and things like that. And eventually, hopefully, this intuitive idea of weight is understood. The second thing that I do is that once, for example, you need some kind of a balance. It could be a shopkeeper's balance or something like that, but you need two things that you can put together. So this physical object that I'm showing over here is important to sort of for the child to physically have. And then you sort of, the first thing that you do is you put two identical things. So you have to do a lot of experimentation. So first put identical balls. So the first step would be identical balls on the scale. So once you get to the scale, so I've gotten to the scale. So first was you do the first point was being intuitive. The second was that on the scale, what you need to do is you need to start talking about identical objects. So pick identical objects like balls and marbles and things like that, which have the same weight, and get this idea across that when the balance, so you should not put different objects on the same scale. You should put identical objects on two sides of the scale. So the right and the left must have two tennis balls or two marbles or two things which look, feel, and are actually in weight, in terms of weight, equal, so that the child visually feels that they're putting identical things onto two sides of the balance. And if you can show that the balance is horizontal, that is convincing the child that two things of when the balance when you put two things of equal weight on the balance stays horizontal. Okay, that's the first part. Okay, so once the child agrees that identical objects, and this would be with the same weight, that's what you're trying to capture. So you'd say identical objects, and you're saying same weight, uh, lead to horizontal scales, right? So that's the first part. Once the child understands that identical objects lead to horizontal scale, then what you do is you try to put different objects with the same weight. So now you're going to put different on the second try. You're going to put different objects, but now it's still the same weight, and ask whether the weight of objects is the same and get them to intuitively feel that the weight is the same. So now they get convinced that now they've made another leap. What the leap that they've made is that when the scale is horizontal, objects have the same weight, right? Initially, what you did was you convinced them that when the weights are equal, the scale is horizontal. That's the first part. The second part is you are making this leap that when the scale is horizontal, objects are the same weight. That's a different concept. So we've gotten two concepts across by playing. And then eventually you have to get this idea that when you put one heavier and one lighter, so for example, you could give them a heavier object and a lighter object, they intuitively tell you that, oh, this object is heavier and this object is lighter. And through experimentation, they find out that heavier objects cause the balance to tilt towards the heavier side. So now what you have to do is pick heavier and lighter objects. So heavy and heavy maybe on the right. So heavy maybe on the right, and just as shown in the picture right over here, heavy is on the right, light is on the left, and you have to repeat by doing various experimentation. And how does the child know this is heavy or light? Because of the intuitive idea that they have gained. So this comes through their intuitive idea that what is heavy or what is light is what they hold in their hands and say, oh, this is heavy and this is light. Then you put heavy on the right, light on the left, and the right scale goes down, the left scale goes up. You do it many times, and then the child is convinced that when you put two objects, whenever the scale goes down, that object is the heavier object. Now the next phase would be, you don't let the child touch the object, so the child can't see whether the object is heavier or lighter. You put them on the scale, and now the child sees one side of the scale go down and the other side go up, and then the child is convinced that the heavier object, that the side that goes down, is the heavier side. So there are multiple steps to this whole story that you have to carefully develop as you do this physical experimentation, right? So the basic idea is, the main idea would be, first is build intuition. So intuition is very important. That's what you do by actually feeling and playing with objects. Then you show that same weight implies horizontal scales. Horizontal, the balance is horizontal. Then in the next step, you show horizontal means same weight. That's a different same weight. And the fourth would be, so these are two parts of the same problem. Then in the fourth part, what you would do is you would talk about that heavy object implies scale sinks towards a heavier object. And then the fifth would be, if the scale sinks, it implies it carries the heavy object. Okay, so these are two parts of the same problem, so that now, and they both rely on this intuition. Without it, we would not be able to get the child to understand this idea of how scales balance. And then as you go on, there is this issue of measuring weight. And now again, you have to convince the child, and this is a very slow process. I mean, if you think about it, they talk about measuring weight. So if we think about measuring weight, this is not very obvious or easy. So here's a scale, and you put a bar. So I'm just thinking of a scale, and here's a bar. And now, for example, you say, okay, I'm going to put maybe a triangle here, and I'm going to measure it with maybe 2 marbles. And you say, okay, a triangle weighs 2 marbles. And then you have the same scale, and here's this. And now you put another square on top, and this also turns out to be 2 marbles. So you say, oh, the triangle weighs 2 marbles and the square weighs 2 marbles. So now, in order to convince yourself that actually it means that triangles and the yellow triangle and the blue square have the same weight, you'd have to do a third measurement. And the third measurement would actually require you to put the blue square here and the yellow triangle on the right, and that would convince a child that actually this measurement scheme that we are devising of using marbles or some kind of a unit of weight is actually working, because what it showed was, this showed that the triangle weighs 2 marbles, it showed the square weighed 2 marbles. Now, in order to verify that actually the triangle weighs the same as a blue square, we have to do the last experimentation, although we would really like it to be true. But these three, just claiming that the triangle weighs the same as the blue square would not be sufficient. We'd have to do this last experiment to convince a child that the entire story that we have built is consistent and is holding together. And now you can play the same game with other objects. So, for example, if you have maybe a triangle, so here's our balance, and now maybe if I put a big triangle here, it's going to be worth 3 of these objects. And now if I put another, and I have the same old blue square, which was a small blue square, it's supposed to be a small blue square. So here's our small blue square, and this was worth 2 marbles. And now, in order to convince us that this still makes sense, what we talked about, what I have to do is I have to put the big yellow triangle here, and the blue square here. And what I'll find is that this side goes down and this side goes up, convincing the child that what we said was that the triangle is worth 3 marbles and the blue square is worth 2 marbles. We'd like to convince the child that the yellow triangle is heavier than the blue square. Would have to be done this way. And this last step is important to make sure that our entire story that we have built over here and here and in the earlier pages is all consistent. Okay, thank you.